Hello, I am Object147, bringing you video discussions, memes, and rants about historical pop culture, anime, games, and anything in between. As the conflict in Ukraine progressed, and the world got wind of the heavy losses Russian armored units were suffering, many major public outlets and personalities have once again started to speculate that the tank has outlived its usefulness on a modern battlefield. At first, I was under the impression that the notion of tanks not being dead because of ATGMs would be a rather cold take at this point, as it has been brought up many times in the past and has since become a meme among tankery enthusiasts. But upon digging a little bit further, I found out that there are actual major outlets that believe in the possible obsolescence of tanks. I know I'm a bit late on capitalizing on this topic, and many other military channels have done much more thorough presentations on this issue, but I wanted to have a crack at summarizing the points discussed myself and present it in a more concise format. Basically, my take at giving a quick answer to the question without having to go through a history lesson or a lesson on basic tactical principles. Many of the aforementioned videos are rather focused on the more technical aspects, specifically examining individual circumstances and debunking certain claims made to suggest the obsolescence of tanks, looking at how the introduction of newer weapon systems that are supposedly making tanks obsolete are not exactly the end-all be-all, emphasizing combined arms and how the tank was never supposed to be invincible. They reflect on the history of armored warfare, looking into past claims of new weapons development that were also suggested of rendering tanks obsolete, and how tanks have since adapted to overcome such threats, be it through improvements in technologies or tactics. Now, if you are an active member within the tankery community, this is all basic stuff and may seem obvious. I want to take things a step back and look at things at a wider issue, and I think it's to do with the cultural perception of a tank and the dissonance between what a layman thinks a tank is, what the word tank signifies in casual vernacular, and what roles modern main battle tanks are doctrinally assigned. Now, under casual circumstances, it is very common to use the word tank or its derivatives as a descriptive term for something that is very stalwart and resilient to damage. For example, when you're saying that you're creating a tank build in a combat RPG, you are saying that you're making a build that can soak up a lot of hits before dying, maxing out defense and HP, etc. And a way that tanks weren't really used or designed for since the end of World War II. Rather than a shield wall or a moving fortress, a more appropriate comparison of the role of the tank is to that of heavy cavalry. A common trend I notice among these speculators are that they are approaching the issue from a wrong angle, assuming that the means to destroy a system renders that system obsolete, instead of looking at the value said system provides otherwise. In other words, just because something can be destroyed does not mean it doesn't serve a purpose. The basic rifleman still remains arguably the most important asset on the battlefield, despite also being one of the most vulnerable. Systems are not rendered obsolete because they can be countered. They are rendered obsolete when they can no longer effectively serve in their respective niche. To most modern tank using countries, the primary purpose of a main battle tank is mobile direct fire support, and that is a requirement that to many nations does not seem like it'll go away anytime soon. But again, this could come from a position of ignorance where the people making the claims do not know the purpose of a tank and assume their purpose is supposed to be an unkillable moving fortress, therefore by their logic think that its purpose is in fact no longer valid, seeing them being taken out by a single phallic object that is less than a tenth of its cost. Okay, so what I said so far addresses the concern of the general mainstream soy-yakking about tanks being over. Next, I'm going to look at a slightly more educated take. So from what I've just explained, one might be compelled to say that recent events may not have made tanks in their role obsolete, but perhaps the use of heavy armor on such platform, or the main battle tank in particular, has become more or less a hindrance and something generally not worth the cost. Thus, the future of AFVs is likely going to be in lighter armored vehicles with Hardkill APS, as they are cheaper, lighter, so less of a logistical burden, and are capable of fulfilling the role of mobile direct fire support. This is a claim that Nicholas Moran's video puts focus on. I highly recommend watching their video for the full picture, but basically he points out how Hardkill systems still leaves vehicle very vulnerable to conventional kinetic penetrators, which for people who don't know is the basic guns and shit that can't be so easily intercepted by hardkill systems, as well as heavy artillery and a plethora of other battlefield weaponry that does not nicely fit in the autocannons and small arms category, which in itself is actually quite very vague and widespread. Having a substantial amount of armor on your platforms offers an aura of flexibility and room for error that otherwise will not be afforded to a more lightly armored vehicle, as represented through the integrated survivability onion. You could theoretically argue that we can reach a point where we can stop APDSFS rounds with Hardkill APS systems. First of all, that is a very difficult ask, especially if you consider tank guns are also going to evolve to counteract such measures in this situation. But even on top of that, having passive protection like armor gives a platform something to fall back on if the APS fails. Despite being more expensive, a side that is able to field a system that has heavy armor to fall back upon will have a significant edge in these engagements, because that will mean that your direct fire support platform will be able to stay and contribute to the fight longer and be more difficult to take out. The presence of this heavy armor will force the opponent to employ tactics they otherwise would not have, therefore potentially putting them off balance and restricting their freedom of movement. In other words, the scope of the means to take out an MBT is much more narrower than the scope of the means to take out a lighter vehicle, even if both vehicles are assumed to have APS. So to conclude, the primary role of an MBT is not to be a moving wall intent on soaking up incoming fire, but rather mobile direct fire support. This role has not been made obsolete by ATGMs and drones, as systems are not made obsolete if they can be countered, but rather made obsolete when they no longer serve a purpose or there is a more effective alternative. It will probably be easier to find workarounds to drones and ATGMs than it is to create an entirely new platform or system that can take over the niche that the MBTs deliver. As far as the armor argument is concerned, APS has its limitations that will not make it a suitable substitute for armor. Being able to protect from more threats gives a system more flexibility by limiting the scope of the weapons or tactics that can be used to overcome the threat it poses, which is important because something like a big gun that can move and is shooting at you will be a priority target. This also means that there is less of a burden on supporting forces in looking out for threats that can knock out your direct fire support platform. So that is essentially my response if asked to explain why tanks are not obsolete. I actually cut a whole segment where I looked over the specific limitations of modern APS and foreseeable APS development, as I have heard some ridiculously over-optimistic predictions being thrown around, but I hope the notes included were able to sufficiently substitute for that. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you all again next time.